Good morning, Excellencies, dear colleagues, distinguished guests. Good morning and welcome to this special event, which marks the formal observance at the United Nations of the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict, 19 June. It is an honor for Argentina to host once again, together with the offices of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflicts, Ms. Pramila Patten, and for Children and Armed Conflicts, Ms. Virginia Gamba, a special event in commemoration of this International Day. I take this opportunity to thank all the distinguished speakers and all of you for accompanying us today on this very important event. We are gathered here today to raise awareness of the need to prevent, put an end, and fight impunity for crimes on conflicts-related sexual violence, foster solidarity with the survivors, and to pay tribute to all those who are working on the front lines for the eradication of these crimes. As you recall, the International Day was established by the General Assembly in 2015 through its resolution 69/293, which was an initiative put forward by the government of Argentina. I would like to reiterate that Argentina categorically condemns any act of sexual violence in conflicts. These crimes are a serious violation of human rights. They constitute one of the most abominable scourges to human dignity and undermine effort to restore peace and international security. The theme for this year's observance is Bridging the Gender-Digital Divide to Prevent, Address, and Respond to Conflict-Related Sexual Violence. Across the humanitarian, human rights, and international criminal justice sectors, the use of digital technology is gaining traction to advance truth, accountability, and justice in a more efficient and rapid way. But how can technology support efforts to respond and prevent conflict-related sexual violence? How can? Every year, thousands of adults and children are victims of sexual violence in conflict zones around the world. Many don't report the crime, and when they do, many of the cases fail because of poor evidence. Technology can be a useful tool to record the documentation of the experiences of survivors of sexual violence and help advance accountability. It also helps activists and other individuals at risk to self-protect and to organize community protection. Digital devices and platforms can also give victims, survivors, therapeutic space by enabling them to receive assistance, speak out, share these stories, and help them overcome trauma. However, the opportunities provided by technological development have amplified violations of human rights. Sexual harassment and gender-based hate speech have also propagated in the digital space, and in some contexts, this incitement to violence that started online can lead to other forms of violence, including sexual violence in conflict. In this regard, we are concerned that in recent years, reports indicate increasing numbers of conflict-related sexual violence perpetrated against persons based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. Also, gender-based hate speech is particularly exacerbated in the case of women participating in public life, such as politicians, activists, feminists, journalists, and human rights defenders, who face higher levels of violence, including in digital contexts and especially on social media. Digital transformation has the potential to advance towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. However, people need to have access to it and know how to use it. It is estimated that by 2022, 63% of women around the world use the internet, compared to 69% of men, while this percentage is reduced to 30% in many developing countries and close to 20% in the least developed countries. The digital skills gap deepens if other factors are also considered, such as age, education, racial ethnic origin, place of residence, income level, and access to digital devices. Therefore, to address the gender-digital divide, it is key to adopt a gender-transformative, intersectional, intergenerational, intercultural, and human rights-based approach. We strongly believe that the best way to address any type of human rights violation, including sexual violence in conflict, is to prevent it from happening in the first place. This is why it is imperative to address gender inequality and the invisible drivers of sexual violence as root causes of this scourge. Regarding access to justice and accountability, it is essential to generate greater cooperation and exchange of good practices in the areas of investigation, assistance to victims and survivors, extradition, and legal assistance to eradicate impunity. In this sense, Argentina is a member of the international cooperation mechanism called Justice Rapid Response, which provides rapid assistance in the investigation of serious crimes against international law for state and international organizations. Within this framework, Argentina considers that this alliance is and joint work with UN Women of great value, which guarantees the inclusion of specialists in gender issues in the investigation of crimes. With regard to the protection of survivors of sexual violence in conflict, Argentina understands that it is essential to create mechanisms to protect, assist, and reintegrate all survivors of such violence in collaboration with women's organizations and other civil society members. We highlight the importance of having women protection advisors in peacekeeping operations to improve coordination and the information available for the monitoring and prevention of sexual violence in conflict. Dear colleagues, sexual violence in conflict is a despicable crime that not only affects international peace and security, but it is also a human right and a gender issue. It is a scourge that affects every society and prevents its sustainable development and the full realization of human rights. We must redouble our efforts to adopt an inclusive and international approach while eradicating these crimes. Achieving durable peace and prosperous societies is not possible without the expertise, meaningful participation, and leadership of women in all their diversity. I would like to conclude with a quote by Nadia Murad, A survivor, human rights activist, and 2018 Nobel Peace Prize, Nadia once said, "I want to be the last girl in the world with a story like mine." We hope that the discussion today will contribute to advance a world without any other story like Nadia's, and where survivors can rebuild their lives and pursue truth, justice, and reparation. Thank you very much for your listen and for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Mrs. Maria del Carmen Squef, Permanent Representative of Argentina to the United Nations. Under-Secretary General, Mrs. Virginia Gamba, Assistant Secretary General, Mrs. Diene Keita, dear Jineth Bedoya, journalist from Colombia and a survivor of conflict-related sexual violence, and one of my 5 global champions on prevention and response to conflict-related sexual violence, Mrs. Karen Naimer, Director at the Physicians for Human Rights, distinguished guests and participants, both online and in person. A very warm welcome to the 9th commemoration of the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict. Every year since 2015, we have marked this occasion through expression of solidarity with survivors and those working to support them on the front lines, often at great personal risk. Yet, despite international awareness, the global trend lines of conflict-related sexual violence are worsening. The world is facing the highest number of conflicts since World War II, while the number of people forced to flee their homes has reached a record of 110 million. Arms proliferation, increasing militarization, and shrinking civic space continue to exacerbate sexual violence and challenge safe reporting and response. At the same time, new threats are emerging from the largely ungoverned digital space, compounding the patterns and trends of conflict-related sexual violence. The profound ramifications of misogynistic hate speech and incitement to violence are amplified on digital platforms. Technology-facilitated sexual violence is not a new phenomenon. You will all recall how in 2014, in territories under ISIL control, women and girls were routinely trafficked, sold, and traded through online platforms such as Telegram. Sex traffickers have long used the internet as a tool to carry out the grooming and recruitment of women and children and to advertise exploitative services. Digital currencies such as Bitcoin have been used to trade victims, rendering it even more difficult to track and trace the financial flows that fuel this illicit trade. The human trafficking business model has largely shifted online, particularly for recruitment and advertisement for victims for sexual exploitation. In Ukraine, after Russia's full-scale invasion, there are reports of huge spikes in online searches across multiple languages and countries for explicit content and sexual services from Ukrainian women and girls. According to Thomson Reuters, global search traffic for Ukrainian porn increased 600% since the start of the humanitarian crisis, while searches for Ukrainian escort increased 200%. Digital technologies also shape the way individuals experience violence by preserving images of assault, intensifying and prolonging trauma. In Haiti, in a context of collapsed rule of law and corruption, gangs have regularly kidnapped women and girls, in some cases filming victims being raped to put pressure on relatives to pay ransoms. Communication tools and social media can now spread content instantly across the globe, creating a problem so widespread that online platforms themselves cannot address through the currently existing safeguards. The ramifications of sexual violence are not new in terms of stigma, risk of reprisal, and socioeconomic isolation. Yet these devastating effects can be amplified by technology on a scale previously unthinkable. The circulation of these violent images, films, and internet memes magnifies the psychological and emotional harm and socioeconomic isolation experienced by survivors. Frontline service providers are also increasingly facing online threats. These rarely remain online as the frontier between the digital world and the physical one is permeable. Social media-enabled hate speech can lead to physical violence. The increase in online gender-based hate speech and harassment as a deliberate tactic to silence human rights defenders and political activists through the incitement of sexual violence is unacceptable, and Myanmar is one such example. Digital platforms are also being misused to spread disinformation and fuel insecurity. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, inflammatory rhetoric against MONUSCO, including violent demonstration, narrowed the operating space for human rights monitoring and delivery of humanitarian services. In conflict-affected settings, digital tools are increasingly weaponized. Telecommunications and internet shutdowns have been used to punish and isolate populations, as in Ethiopia and Sudan. Internet restrictions impede the ability of survivors to access information, and frequent telecommunications shutdowns hinder access to helplines and other essential services. Nevertheless, the inexorable march forward of technology also offers unprecedented possibilities. Technological innovations hold potential that has not been fully realized. They open the way for new types of response to conflict-related sexual violence and for innovative tools for survivors and frontline service providers. They could be instrumental across the gamut of intervention to eradicate conflict-related sexual violence, including prevention, response, documentation, and accountability efforts. Over the past year, I have led a system-wide effort through the UN Action Network to develop a comprehensive prevention strategy based on our enhanced understanding of the problem and the lived experience of survivors. This framework is intended to serve as a roadmap for more tailored, timely, and effective interventions. Strategically harnessing technology must be a central consideration as we pilot the framework. Technology-driven approaches can also enhance prevention through predictive models which could strengthen early warning. Sexual violence does not occur in a vacuum. It is often planned and at times preceded by hate speech or troop movements. Early warning is key, and digital technologies can be an essential element, particularly where connectivity, social media use, and mobile phone ownership are widespread. Some organizations have already developed apps to register reports through safe self-reporting in streamlined questionnaires, which also assist in training health professionals in the collection of data. Technological innovation may extend and shore up service responses. In many conflict-affected settings, there are few health professionals, especially those specializing in acute trauma resulting from sexual atrocities. Internet-based interventions using mobile and smartphones may also enhance treatment of trauma survivors and extend the geographic reach of scarce healthcare resources. The advent of telehealth for virtual urgent medical care offers tremendous possibilities to reach more survivors. Other support interventions have used online platforms. In Ukraine, for example, the government, with the support of the United Nations, established an online platform focusing on specialized assistance. In Iraq, the government has approved a budget of $19 million to finance reparations pursuant to the law on support to female Yazidi survivors, with some 2,000 applications submitted since 2022, including through an online platform. Safe digital platforms provide the space for survivors to receive assistance, speak out, and share their stories. For example, the digital book of survivors' testimonies that my office launched in 2021, entitled In Their Own Words, Voices of Survivors of Conflict-Related Sexual Violence and Service Providers, is a living repository of the experiences of survivors the world over and serves as a moral compass for my mandate. In better understanding and disseminating the experiences of survivors and the solutions they themselves advocate, there is the possibility of meaningful change. Digital platforms also increasingly serve practitioners. My team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict pursued initiatives to enhance the evidence base for effective accountability measures by partnering with the Journal of International Criminal Justice in the publication of a landmark special issue of the Journal on Accountability for Sexual Violence in Conflict. This partnership launched a digital dialogue series that reached thousands of academics, policymakers, and rule of law practitioners, fostering a community of practice that transcends national borders and institutional divides. For any of these solutions to be successful, digital literacy and universal access is critical. Unless the most vulnerable populations are able to access these tools, their potential will remain limited. It is a matter of concern that women and girls, who constitute the majority of victims, are disproportionately affected by the lack of access to digital tools and resources, hindering their access to life-saving security and public health information and networks. Bridging the gender-digital divide in addressing conflict-related sexual violence is crucial. Any intervention must be rooted in the survivor-centered approach, and technology-based interventions are no exception. This includes working directly with survivors, not as passive beneficiaries, but as the co-creators of solutions, ensuring their participation, engagement, and input. The Secretary General's policy paper on information integrity and digital platforms, a part of our common agenda, provides a roadmap of good practices for member states. In today's increasingly interconnected world, access to digital technologies and the internet is essential for survivors to exercise their rights, fully participate in society, and access information and resources. We cannot allow the digital divide to become the new face of inequality. We must ensure that survivors are empowered rather than victimized in digital spaces. We must not only bring to bear all political and diplomatic tools to end the scourge of conflict-related sexual violence, but also adapt these tools to the digital evolution. It has become clear that business as usual is not an option. Digital threats must be met with technological solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Señora María del Carmen Esquef, Permanent Representative of Argentina to the United Nations, and Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Under Secretary General Pramila Patten, colleagues, and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege to address you today on the occasion of the 9th commemoration of the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict. This day serves as a powerful reminder of our collective responsibility to address conflict-related sexual violence and to explore innovative approaches to prevent, address, and respond to this heinous crime. In our quest for lasting peace and justice, it is crucial to recognize the unique vulnerabilities faced by girls and women in the digital space and to harness the transformative potential of technology in our fight against conflict-related sexual violence. as mandated by the General Assembly and requested by the Security Council, my office plays a critical role in monitoring and reporting on grave violations against children in armed conflict. Sexual violence against children is one of the 6 grave violations that we vigilantly monitor, alongside recruitment and use, killing and maiming, abduction, attacks on schools and hospitals, and the denial of humanitarian access. These violations have devastating consequences for children, leaving them traumatized and scarred, and we must redouble our efforts to put an end to this suffering. All children, regardless of their gender, living in conflict-affected countries are at high risk of becoming targets of sexual violence. The pervasiveness of sexual violence as a tactic of war and terrorism affects women, men, girls, and boys. It is employed for displacement, political persecution, terrorism, ethnic cleansing, and control over female sexual and reproductive health and autonomy. Since 2005, the United Nations has verified over 15,000 cases of rapes and other forms of sexual violence against children in conflict situations. Alarmingly, the last Secretary General's annual report on children in armed conflict reported a 20% increase in rape and sexual violence against children in 2021, with 98% of the victims being girls. However, due to protection concerns, fear of reprisals, stigma, weak rule of law, and inadequate response and services, these crimes remain chronically underreported. The digital age presents both opportunities and threats in the fight against conflict-related sexual violence. When used properly, digital technology becomes a powerful tool for prevention, response, and empowerment. It serves as a platform for survivors to share their stories, access essential services, and find solace in supportive communities. Through the power of digital connectivity, survivors of conflict-related sexual violence can find strength in solidarity and support each other in their journey towards healing and justice. The digital space also enables innovative approaches to early intervention and prevention. By leveraging technology effectively, we can develop early warning systems, analyze data patterns, and intervene swiftly to protect vulnerable individuals from falling victim to conflict-related sexual violence. Moreover, the digital world amplifies the voices demanding justice, accountability, and an end to impunity. Through social media campaigns, online activism, and digital storytelling, we can mobilize global solidarity and advocate for change. Despite this new era with immense potential and opportunities to respond and prevent conflict-related sexual violence, we must not underestimate the increasing threat posed by the digital technologies. One particular concern is the vulnerability of children exposed to conflict-related sexual violence in the digital space. In the midst of armed conflicts, the digital realm becomes a breeding ground for exploitation and abuse, enabling perpetrators to leverage technology and target young people. The digital space provides a platform for the spread of harmful narratives, recruitment of victims, dissemination of graphic content, and even the activities of terrorist and extremist actors. Unfortunately, our existing laws, policies, and frameworks to prevent and respond to sexual violence against children have not kept up with technological advancements, leading to significant gaps in knowledge and evidence regarding the impact of digital technologies on conflict-related sexual violence. These challenges are particularly detrimental for girls, who often face barriers such as limited access to affordable, accessible, and reliable technologies and services. Therefore, it is imperative that we prioritize the protection of the rights and dignity of these vulnerable children by developing evidence-based prevention and response frameworks and interventions that address these challenges arising from the intersection of technology and conflict-related sexual violence. We must also prioritize prevention tools in the digital space to reinforce children's capacities to protect themselves from the use and abuse by parties to conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of these pressing challenges and transformative opportunities, allow me to present to you 3 key recommendations on how to best bridge the gender-digital divide to prevent and respond to conflict-related sexual violence. Firstly, we must prioritize empowerment through education. Comprehensive digital literacy programs must be implemented, particularly in conflict-affected areas, to equip children with the necessary skills and knowledge to navigate the digital space safely and responsibly. These programs should go beyond basic computer skills and encompass critical thinking, media literacy, and digital citizenship. Through education, we empower children to become critical thinkers and active participants in online platforms, as well as enable them to assert their rights, report violations, and advocate for change. Secondly, collaboration and partnerships are crucial in addressing the gender-digital divide and combating conflict-related sexual violence. It requires the involvement of various stakeholders, including governments, international organizations, civil society, the private sector, and communities. Together, we must develop comprehensive strategies that promote digital safety, prevent online exploitation, and provide holistic support to survivors. This entails sharing best practices, coordinating efforts, and leveraging technological innovations to effectively tackle the issue in the digital space. Through the establishment of such joint initiatives, we can maximize the impact of our interventions and ensure a coordinated response across sectors and regions. Lastly, we must foster inclusive digital spaces. It is essential to ensure that the digital world is inclusive, safe, and accessible to all, regardless of gender or geographical location. The gender-digital divide remains a significant barrier to the participation of girls in the digital space. Discriminatory social norms, limited access to resources, and unequal opportunities hinder their full engagement and expose them to greater risks of sexual violence. Therefore, we must address the root causes of this divide. This entails investing in infrastructure, expanding connectivity, and bridging the digital divide, particularly in conflict-affected areas. By ensuring affordable and reliable internet access, we create an environment where every child is empowered to participate fully in the digital space and free from the threat of conflict. The power of the digital world lies not only in its potential for harm, but also in its capacity for transformation. By empowering the vulnerable, strengthening collaboration and partnerships, and fostering inclusive digital spaces, we can shape a future where the digital realm becomes a powerful force in the struggle against conflict-related sexual violence. Let us unite to build a world where the rights and dignity of every individual, regardless of age or gender, are protected. Our collective dedication and action can bring us closer to a future free from conflict-related sexual violence. Thank you.
My name is Nasioku Bright, and I'm the Chief of Staff of the Office of the SRSG on Sexual Violence and Conflict. Thank you, Ambassador Maria del Carmen Squef, SRSG Pramila Patton, SRSG Virginia Gamba, for your collective dedication, focus, and leadership. I'm honored to moderate the remaining segments of this commemoration today, which will begin, the second segment will begin with a brief video statement by Her Royal Highness Maria Teresa, Grand Duchess of Luxembourg, and global champion for the fight against conflict-related sexual violence, appointed in 2021 by SRSG Pramila Patton.
Sexual violence as a weapon of war destroys the lives of thousands of women. This repeated act of the worst possible brutality inflicted on women rips away all dignity and destroys not only the victims and their families, but also the social tissue for generations. I work every day with these terrifying realities as United Nations global champion for the fight against sexual violence in conflict. And through my organization, Stand, Speak, Rise Up, in favor of survivors around the world. We must find ways for the digital world in which we live to be at the service of these most vulnerable. Technology must foremost serve to denounce violence, sexual violence, to collect legal proof, and to act against perpetrators, to collect first-hand testimonies to help justice, and to enable these extraordinary women to have access to law. These are absolutely necessary conditions for these women to rebuild their lives.
I'd like to welcome Colombian journalist and survivor, Ms. Jineth Bedoya Lima. You have the floor. Welcome.
Amigos, amigas, reciban un saludo en este significativo día. Querida Pramila Patten, gracias por permitirnos potenciar la voz a tantas sobrevivientes de violencia sexual en el mundo entero. Unir lo que está fracturado en mil pedazos, inevitablemente, por más que se peguen las partes, quedarán fisuras. Eso es lo que pasa con la vida de las personas víctimas y sobrevivientes de violencia sexual. Se ha repetido de muchas formas, pero aún ni la sociedad ni los estados tienen conciencia real sobre la afectación y los daños que al final minan el núcleo de cualquier comunidad. Por eso es imperativo no ahorrar esfuerzos e impulsar las acciones necesarias que permitan subsanar ese daño. Y todo lo que hagamos para disminuir el impacto de la estigmatización y la impunidad es de carácter urgente e inmediato. En medio de ese amplio espectro están las nuevas formas de comunicar. La multimedia, las redes sociales, el mundo digital, creado para unirnos y hacer más cercanas las historias y las naciones. Eso, por el contrario, abrió un abismo que a veces parece no tender un puente de conexión posible. Y como siempre, las mujeres y las comunidades minoritarias y marginadas son las que reciben el golpe más fuerte de la invisibilización o el acoso. Creíamos que la digitalización de los medios de comunicación iba a permitir llegar con noticias y con la realidad al mundo y a millones de personas. Pero hoy, esos medios de comunicación tuvieron que cerrar sus contenidos y cobrar por ellos para poder subsistir, lo que aisló aún más a quienes han estado relegados, porque las prioridades económicas dejan siempre en el último plano a la información. Entonces, esas comunidades lo único que reciben son noticias falsas, fake news, o cadenas de datos que convierten en verdad lo que es solo una especulación. Y más grave aún, las redes sociales y los portales gratuitos se apropian el derecho de juzgar o decidir sobre la vida y condición de quienes han afrontado hechos victimizantes. Esa es la realidad diaria de las víctimas y sobrevivientes de violencia sexual en muchos lugares del mundo. Lo han tenido que afrontar un grupo de mujeres indígenas en Canadá, las sobrevivientes de la guerra civil en Guatemala y El Salvador, en Centroamérica, y las jóvenes feministas que denuncian los brotes de nazismo en Europa. A ellas les han recordado, a través de publicaciones digitales, que su activismo debe ser castigado con un escarmiento al referirse a la violación. Pero también las han expuesto en portales digitales fantasma, señalándolas de mentirosas y burlándose de quienes han sobrevivido a la violencia sexual. Y en otro punto del planeta, en las escuelas rurales de Uganda, de Chad o Sudán, las niñas no solo deben quedarse en casa por la falta de elementos de higiene para los días de su ciclo menstrual, también siguen aisladas del mundo porque las redes de Internet, las computadoras o una tablet son inasequibles por su costo, o simplemente no hay redes ni antenas para acceder a la conectividad. ¿Cómo puede entonces una víctima buscar ayuda o encontrar redes de apoyo? Ese es el reto que tenemos como sociedad, como organizaciones y como estados. Pero siempre hay una motivación para creer que los cambios son posibles. En mi país, Colombia, hace unos años, un grupo de sobrevivientes decidimos tocar la puerta de una multinacional para que nos donara teléfonos celulares. Y con un equipo de amigos periodistas viajamos al Pacífico Sur, donde no hay desarrollo, no hay vías y la salud sigue siendo precaria. Convocamos a varias mujeres afectadas por el conflicto armado, muchas de ellas analfabetas, y emprendimos algo que parecía imposible: enseñarles a hacer periodismo con ese pequeño teléfono. El resultado fue grandioso. Ellas grabaron rústicamente historias que querían contar. Nosotros las editamos y el periódico El Tiempo, donde yo trabajo, las publicó en sus redes sociales y las hizo virales. Eso permitió que el país conociera a estas valientes sobrevivientes y que ellas pudieran conectarse con mujeres sobrevivientes de otros lugares del mundo. Pero además, estas mujeres iniciaron proyectos de emprendimiento y autosostenibilidad. Esos son los puentes que debemos tender en el inmenso abismo digital. Se puede, no es imposible. Espero que cuando nos volvamos a encontrar, hayamos dado pasos para que alguien nos permita llegar a algunas de esas remotas escuelas en Uganda y tengamos niñas conectándose con el mundo. Ese es nuestro reto. Gracias.
My colleague will read in English the statement that was just given by Jineth Bedoya Lima, and maybe just a few words about Ms. Bedoya Lima. She's a journalist, writer, international speaker on issues of armed conflict, drug trafficking, and gender violence. She's currently the editor of special issues for the newspaper El Tiempo. She's published 9 books on the armed conflict in Colombia and investigations into organized crime. Her work has earned her several international awards, such as the UNESCO World Press Freedom Prize and the Golden Pen of Freedom from the World Association of News Publishers. In 2009, she created the campaign No es hora de calar, It's Not Time to Be Silent, with which she has managed to help women and girl victims like her. In 2014, the Colombian government, by presidential decree, declared the date of her kidnapping, May 25th, as the National Day to dignify victims of sexual violence. She was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016 for her work defending the rights of women and victims of sexual violence. In October 2021, after 21 years of struggle, She managed to get the Inter-American Court of Human Rights to condemn the Colombian state for the crimes it faced, and for this international court to order historic reparation measures for women survivors of sexual violence and the female journalists. Ms. Bedoya Lima was appointed in 2022 as a global champion by SRSG Pramila Patton.
Dear friends, greetings on this meaningful day. Dear Pramila Patton, thank you for allowing us to amplify the voices of many survivors of sexual violence around the world. Fix what is fractured into 1,000 pieces. Inevitably, no matter how hard the parts are stuck together, cracks will remain. That is what happens to the lives of victims and survivors of sexual violence. It has repeatedly taken place in many forms, but still neither society nor states have a real awareness of the impacts and the damage that, in the end, can undermine the core of any community. For this reason, it is imperative not to spare any efforts and to promote the necessary actions to remedy this damage. Everything we do to reduce the impact of stigmatization and impunity is urgent and immediate. In the middle of this broad spectrum are new ways of communicating. Multimedia, social networks, the digital world, created to unite us and bring stories and nations closer, instead opened an abyss that is sometimes impossible to bridge, even with the connections between us. And as always, women, minorities, and marginalized communities are the ones that receive the strongest blow from erasure or harassment. We believed that the digitization of the media would allow us to reach millions of people with the news and reality of the world. But today, these media outlets had to paywall their content and charge for it in order to survive, further isolating those who have always been relegated because economic priorities leave information on the back burner. Then, these communities only receive fake news or pieces of information that turn into truth what is only speculation. Even more serious, social networks and free websites appropriate the right to judge or decide on the lives and conditions of those who have faced victimizing events. That is the daily reality for victims and survivors of sexual violence in many parts of the world. It has been faced by Indigenous women's groups in Canada, Civil War survivors in Guatemala and El Salvador, in Central America, and young feminists who denounce the outbreaks of Nazism in Europe. They've been reminded through digital publications that their activism must be punished with a lesson when referring to rape. But they have also been exposed on anonymous websites, branding them as liars and mocking those who have survived sexual violence. And elsewhere on the planet, in rural schools in Uganda, Chad, or Sudan, girls not only have to stay at home due to the lack of hygiene supplies for the days of their menstrual cycle, they also remain isolated from the world because internet networks, computers, or a tablet are unaffordable due to their cost, or there are simply no networks or antennas to access connectivity. How then can a victim seek help or find support networks? That is the challenge we have as a society, as organizations, and as states. But there is always a motivation to believe that changes are possible. In my country, Colombia, a few years ago, a group of survivors decided to knock on the door of a multinational company to donate cell phones to us. And with a team of journalist friends, we traveled to the South Pacific, where there is no development, no roads, and health remains precarious. We gathered several women affected by the armed conflict. Many of them were illiterate, and we undertook something that seemed impossible, teaching them to do journalism with that little phone. The result was great. They recorded in an amateur way the stories they wanted to tell. We edited them, and the newspaper El Tiempo, where I work, published them on its social networks and made them viral. This allowed the country to get to know these brave survivors, and they were able to connect with women survivors from other parts of the world. But it also allowed these women to start entrepreneurial and self-sustainability projects. These are the bridges that we must build in the immense digital abyss. It is achievable. It is not impossible. I hope, when we meet again, that we will have taken steps to allow us to reach one of those remote schools in Uganda and have those girls connecting with the world.
Thank you. I'm delighted to introduce Karen Naimer, who is the Director of Programs at Physicians for Human Rights. She oversees all strategic initiatives within their program division, including their response to torture, sexual violence, mass atrocities, excessive force, attacks on health care, and access to asylum. A lawyer with a specialty in international criminal law and human rights, she established and directed PHR's internationally recognized program on sexual violence in conflict zones and served in that role for 10 years. Karen, the floor is yours.
Distinguished hosts, honored survivors, esteemed panelists and guests, thank you for bringing us together on this important day. Every year, tens of thousands of adults and children around the world endure horrific sexual violence in armed conflict. These cases are some of the hardest to prosecute because survivors of all genders and ages face enormous hurdles to bring their cases forward. For children, the obstacles are compounded. Stigma, fear of retaliation, and rejection make it so difficult to speak out. Despite these overwhelming challenges, some survivors do come forward, yet the legal system in their communities often fail them due to a lack of evidence to support their allegations. Justice is almost never served, perpetuating a culture of impunity. Evidence fails because forensic exams are rarely conducted. Medical charts are incomplete or illegible. Doctors, police, lawyers, and judges don't communicate with each other. And hospitals and police stations don't have locked cabinets to store confidential medical records, risking loss, theft, or tampering. At Physicians for Human Rights, we've been working to address these challenges, and we've been leveraging technology to strengthen innovative ways to access justice. We train medical, law enforcement, and legal professionals to enhance the way they collect, document, and preserve forensic medical evidence of sexual violence to support prosecutions of these crimes. We cultivate networks of collaboration so medical legal professionals can work with each other on a case-by-case basis to increase the likelihood of successful prosecutions and to better support survivors at the center of this process. We've been working in Kenya, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Iraq, and elsewhere to develop concrete ways of responding to sexual violence in individual cases and in cases of mass crimes. For individual cases, we train clinicians to gather physical and psychological evidence using trauma-informed, survivor-centered approaches for interviewing patients, carrying out head-to-toe exams, conducting pediatric evaluations. We help develop new skills like forensic photography and new tools like standardized forensic medical intake forms to improve documentation. We sensitize professionals from all sectors that credible forensic evidence is available in medical clinics to inform investigations and prosecutions. While gathering evidence in individual cases has been a huge challenge, it is even harder in the context of mass crimes. Perpetrators are often unknown to survivors, and as a result, many investigators and judges assume there is simply no point in pursuing the case, or the police or military may be alleged perpetrators in these cases. But we are training professionals to aggregate and analyze medical data to help identify patterns of perpetration, which are critical for pursuing command responsibility or demonstrating the widespread or systematic elements necessary to prove crimes against humanity. To help this analysis, PHR developed Medicapt, a groundbreaking mobile app that pairs a digital medical form with photo capture capacity. Medicapt allows clinicians to capture more compelling forensic medical evidence during a patient encounter, to preserve it securely in the cloud, and to safely transmit it to the justice sector to inform investigations. The app has been shown to improve the quality and quantity of forensic evidence collected. It bypasses basic infrastructure hurdles like stockouts of paper forms, and it strengthens security through sophisticated data encryption and reinforces the integrity of evidence collected, and it fortifies chain of custody, ultimately to help improve accountability. We've been working with clinician end users in Kenya and DRC to design and develop the app from the start, using a process known as collaborative design or co-design. Clinicians in Kenya who self-identify as the pioneers went live with patients in 2018, and we are now piloting Medicapt at 4 hospitals in 2 countries. To date, we've trained more than 70 clinicians to use the app, 60% of whom are women, and they have documented more than 2,270 cases of sexual violence using Medicapt. Ultimately, we have seen that the presence of more data can result in relying less on the testimony of individual survivors, which can put a significant burden on them. It also provides judges with more compelling evidence to consider when adjudicating these cases. Medicapt is poised to have global impact to document sexual violence cases anywhere, anytime. There is enormous opportunity for scaling this technology to secure more convictions. These developments are necessary, but they are certainly not sufficient, and technology is not a panacea. But tools like Medicapt offer one more option in the toolbox to strengthen evidence in sexual violence cases and help improve accountability, even in resource-constrained settings. Small changes can have a huge ripple effect, and we are starting to see those changes dramatically increase access to justice for survivors of sexual violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for your important work and the important work of Physicians for Human Rights. I'm honored to introduce UN Assistant Secretary General, Ms. Diene Keita, who is the Deputy Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. Ms. Keita, ASG Keita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your Excellency, the Permanent Representative of Argentina, Carmen Skef, SRG on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Madam Patton, SRG for Children and Armed Conflict, Madam Gamba, Excellencies, honorable panelists, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues. Thank you for your invitation to speak at this very important convening today as we commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict. I have the honor of delivering these remarks on behalf of the United Nations Action, a network of 24 United Nations entities united in the goal of preventing and ending sexual violence in current and emerging conflicts. It is a commitment we all take very seriously. This commitment is a fundamental part of our mandate. Every day, we work to ensure that every survivor, no matter who is the perpetrator, has access to life-saving services. We constantly advocate, working closely with all members of the United Nations Action Network for a funded and functional gender-based violence response so that all survivors, including survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, can get the care they need. And I'm very honored to pass right after the former panelist. The work she does is absolutely important. We also ensure investment in prevention through addressing harmful social and gender norms that perpetuate and normalize this form of violence. if there is a true delivery as one. The well-being of women and children through the United Nations Action Network is a formidable, effective platform. In their beauty, progress and development bring in their normal course new challenges. Over the past years, we have witnessed a proliferation in technology-facilitated gender-based violence, fueled by misogyny and disinformation campaigns. Women are targeted in online and through technology, having a direct impact on their ability to use technology safely and to participate in a life increasingly dominated by technologies. Women may be affected by targeted campaigns. For example, when their individual information is released online, leading to a direct physical harm, or as part of the continuum of coercive control in the context of intimate partner violence. Mis- and disinformation campaigns can fuel violence, including conflict-related sexual violence, at a very little expense or effort by nefarious actors. Excellencies, advances in technology, such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, can further facilitate these targeted campaigns. New crises have multiplied as entrenched conflict have deepened, resulting in shrinking civic space. Every new wave of conflict brings with its rising tide of human tragedy, including new waves of war's oldest, most silenced and least condemned crime, sexual violence. In some settings, disturbing trends of gender-based hate speech and incitement to violence fuel conflict, in which rape and other forms of sexual violence are used to humiliate, destabilize targeted community. In conflict zone, traditional form of law enforcement and social protection may be weakened or absent, allowing technology-facilitated gender-based violence to proliferate unchecked. Data protection system and the safety, privacy, and transparency of the technology we use is critical to prevent this form of violence. That is, digital inclusion will only be truly achieved where we have digital safety. UNFPA recently published Making All Space Safe and guidance on the safe and ethical use of technology to address GBV and harmful practices. We also hosted the first ever technology-facilitated GBV Global Symposium last year, with a follow-up event to be held later this year. What is critical across all these efforts is first and foremost that in our effort to close the gender-digital divide, to accelerate our outreach and transform lives. We must protect, we must respect and promote the right of each individual survivor to privacy and safety in their access to technology. This includes, for example, ensuring survivor-centered approaches and the safety, protection, and privacy of individuals and their data as part of data collection and reporting system. This commitment is shared across the United Nations, reflected most recently in the United Nations Policy Brief, a Global Digital Compact, an open, free, and secure digital future for all, released last month as part of the United Nations Secretary General's Our Common Agenda. It outlined shared principles for an open, free, and secure digital future for all. It builds on a momentum set by international community to improve digital cooperation and shape a digital future that shows the full potential for beneficial technology usage. There is a great momentum in the work and voices of survivors. By the UN, women-led organizations, and by feminist movements to address technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Excellencies, distinguished guests, closing the gender digital divide is a critical component of giving effect to this powerful movement. And so I take this opportunity on the occasion of the International Day for Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict to make a call for action to support increased access to safe and ethical technology to bridge the gender digital divide. And we join together today in this space to reaffirm our commitment to ending gender-based violence in conflict. Progress will happen. It has to, we shall stand ready to adapt it through innovative tools, ethical tools, behavioral science, to ensure that no woman nor child is left behind. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, ASG Keita, for all that you do, all that you've done on women and youth empowerment and sustainable human development and gender-based violence issues in the context of humanitarian crisis. Thank you very much and for the work that UNFPA does. With this said, we now end this segment and we move to the interventions from member states. Our first intervention will be from His Excellency Ambassador Silvio Gonzato, Deputy Head of the EU Delegation. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the European Union, let me thank the Permanent Mission of Argentina, the offices of the SRSGs for Sexual Violence in Conflict and Children and Armed Conflict for organizing today's event. Excellencies, this International Day is an opportunity for us to re-energize our commitment and actions to end the scourge of conflict-related sexual violence. It remains a sad reality that CRSV is entrenched in warfare. A number of recent reports, including by you, SRSG Patton, have pointed to worrying examples in Ethiopia, Haiti, Ukraine, and many other conflict-affected regions of the world, where CRSV is deployed as a tactic to spread terror. It wreaks havoc in communities, with women and girls often bearing the brunt of this heinous crime. The EU welcomed the focus in this year's event on the relevance of the gender divide in the context of CRSV. The gender digital divide, I apologize, in the context of CRSV. With the increased use of internet and technology globally, we are witnessing growing interaction between the digital and physical worlds. This also pertains to the situation of conflict. In many ways, the digital revolution is a double-edged sword. We have seen digital platforms be manipulated to spread hate speech and gender-based violence. This can amplify CRSV, including the trafficking of women and girls for sexual exploitation. Further, technologies can be misused to spread disinformation and deliberately smear the reputation of human rights defenders, survivors, and civil society working to combat sexual violence in conflict zones. In the most horrific cases, technology and digital platforms have been used to coordinate acts of reprisal against such actors. And yet, we have seen survivors, human rights defenders, and civil society representatives harness the constructive powers of technology. This includes enhancing access to support, information, and services, including psychosocial support and sexual and reproductive healthcare services for those impacted by CRSV. By bridging the gender-digital divide, we can empower all survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. Excellencies, in closing, let me share 4 parting messages. First, we need to step up and advocate more at the UN, in our national governments, and in our communities. In this regard, we look forward to the annual debate on CRSV taking place next month in the Security Council. Second, we need to match our words with funding. The EU is currently giving around 4 million euros in CRSV projects on access to justice and support to survivors, with another 4.2 million in the pipeline. Third, we must deepen our efforts to ensure justice for all survivors of CRSV. The world is watching. Justice must prevail. And finally, we must recognize that conflict-related sexual violence is not an isolated activity. It is the result of deeply entrenched inequalities and harmful norms. Our best solutions to ending CRSV is to ensure full, equal, and meaningful participation by women in decision-making at all levels, and to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for your incisive remarks. We turn to Croatia, Ms. Ivana Consul from the Permanent Mission of Croatia. The floor is yours, Ms. Consul.
Can you hear me? Croatia aligns itself with the statement of the European Union, and I would like to add some additional remarks in my national capacity. We thank the organizers of this important event, the Permanent Mission of Argentina, the offices of the SRSGs for Sexual Violence and Conflict, and Children and Armed Conflict. Likewise, we appreciate immensely the powerful testimony of Ms. Lima, as only by listening to survivors and people working to improve the situation on the ground can we hope for any kind of progress. As violent conflicts continue to disrupt lives and undermine human rights in countless ways in numerous places, including Sudan, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Ukraine, it is sad and disturbing truth that sexual violence is still being used as a weapon of war. We welcome the focus of this event on the gender-digital divide and its connection to conflict-related sexual violence. We agree that digital platforms carry immense potential for good, as they can help survivors access support and services, but at the same time are often used for gender-based hate speech and incitement to violence, and can effectively fuel conflict. The digital age is fast, ever-changing, and spreading to reach every corner of the world. Innovation and technological change touch every aspect of our existence, and it is pertinent to be aware and informed. We therefore welcome that the UN, from the Secretary General to the CSW and us today, is looking how to address the challenges and opportunities that the digital revolution brings on a global scale. The connection between conflict-related sexual violence and the discrimination, violence against women, and sexual violence in peace has already been established. Armed conflicts tend to exacerbate pre-existing discriminatory conditions, and for this reason, it is important to understand that bridging the gender-digital divide as a preventive action. With this in mind, it is urgent that we secure accessible and safe technologies for women, girls, and all other vulnerable groups in order to support their social inclusion, meaningful participation, as well as higher representation in peace processes, conflict prevention, conflict resolution, and peace building. At the same time, we must be relentless in our efforts to fight sexual and gender-based violence, both offline and online, due to its devastating impact on targeted individuals and society as a whole. Accountability remains crucial for moving forwards. Innovative approaches, like digital tools and platforms providing survivors with assistance and support, should be considered as part of the solution. Croatia reiterates its full commitment to addressing conflict-related sexual violence. Likewise, we strongly encourage all states that have not yet done so to align their laws with international human rights, humanitarian, and criminal law standards on rape and sexual violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Consul. I now give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Kyo Motun of the Permanent Mission of the Republic of the Union of Myanmar. The floor is yours, Ambassador. Okay, it appears that the ambassador is not here. So I turn to Ambassador Arlene Tickner, Deputy PR, Deputy Permanent Representative for Colombia. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor, and to the organizers for providing this crucial space. Let me begin just by acknowledging the presence of my co-national, Jineth Bedoya, and by expressing my personal and deep admiration and respect for her work. Jineth, your courage and perseverance have been fundamental in Colombia and now in the world through this nomination that you've received in the fight for the elimination of sexual violence, and I just want to appreciate that work and my respect. The government of Gustavo Petro is deeply committed to the prevention of sexual violence with a survivor-centered approach. This commitment, which is closely related to our defense of gender equality, has been manifest in several ways since the government took office last year, including the design of a participatory, pacifist, and intersectional feminist foreign policy, the formulation of Colombia's first national action plan for the implementation of Resolution 1325 in consultation with civil society, adherence to the International Alliance on Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict, support for the recommendations of the Colombian Truth Commission, which gave visibility to the systematic use of sexual violence as a weapon of war, and encouragement for the opening of macro case 11 on sexual violence by the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. The political will to fulfill these obligations was reaffirmed recently with the announcement of the creation of the Center for Memory and Research on Sexual Violence, It Is Not Time to Be Silent, in compliance with the ruling of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights on the case presented precisely by Jineth Bedoya. In our efforts to address sexual violence and gender-based violence comprehensively, we also recognize that technology can play an enabling and a prevention role. The decisive difference, we think, in its positive or negative impact is closely linked to the gender-digital divide. For example, in the specific case of sexual violence, technology can be an important tool for early warning, prevention, and the reduction of impunity by providing platforms for victims to consult relevant information and take legal action. This is only possible if access to information and communication technologies is affordable and widespread. However, access alone is not enough. We also need to increase digital literacy and provide a safe and enabling environment so that the risk for violence is not increased or women are re-victimized. Undoubtedly, partnership with other stakeholders is fundamental for making this happen. Many developments in recent months in Colombia would have been impossible without the active participation of the media, civil society organizations, the private sector, and academia. Allow me to end by paraphrasing our national development plan that reiterates that we cannot talk about total peace if sexual and gender-based violence persists. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Ambassador Alicia Buenrostro, Deputy Permanent Representative of Mexico. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mexico thanks the mission of Argentina, the Office of the Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict, and the Office of the Special Representative for Children and Armed Conflict for convening this meeting. Sexual violence remains a distressing reality that continues to impact the daily lives of thousands of women, adolescents, girls, and other marginalized groups, such as the LGBTQ+ community, in fragile settings and in conflict-affected countries. In the digital divide era, new challenges related to online sexual and gender-based violence have emerged, such as sexual harassment, cyberbullying, cyberstalking, and gender-based hate speech, just to mention some. Technology-facilitated gender-based violence should therefore be fully recognized everywhere as a human rights violation, and law enforcement agencies at national level should strengthen their capacities to investigate and prosecute these crimes effectively. While efforts continue to be made to combat these hideous crimes, we observe that the emergence of new technologies and innovation and their potential use to prevent and respond to sexual violence in conflict is yet to be fully explored. To that end, we should urgently address the gender-digital divide that exacerbates existing inequalities. This is a crucial endeavor as limited access to information and communication technologies can restrict, for example, survivors' access to reporting mechanisms or to life-saving interventions such as sexual and reproductive health services. New technologies such as mobile applications and social media platforms offer innovative tools to combat sexual violence in conflict and have the potential to amplify survivors' voices, facilitate early warning systems, challenge gender stereotypes, enable real-time data collection, and promote gender empowerment. Much like discrimination, online violence manifests itself in multiple, intersecting, and sometimes subtle forms, and it continues to affect the participation of women in conflict resolution and peace-building efforts. Mexico condemns all forms of intimidation, attacks, and reprisals online and offline against women, human rights defenders, peace builders, and civil society leaders, aimed to silence their voices and discredit their work, and we reiterate our full commitment to the implementation of the agenda of women, peace, and security. Furthermore, in line with our feminist foreign policy, my country, Mexico, calls upon the international community to adopt comprehensive human rights-based, gender-transformative, and intersectional approaches that address the root causes of sexual violence in conflicts. This entails addressing the gender-digital divide and building alliances between technology companies, humanitarian organizations, UN agencies working in the field, and local communities to ensure context-specific and survivor-centered interventions that prioritize the empowerment of women in all their diversity and guarantee their full, equal, and meaningful participation in peace processes and decision-making. Let us work together to end sexual violence in conflict and ensure that survivors can rebuild their lives and communities free from fear and stigma, unleashing their full potential as agents of change in their societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. I turn to Excellency Ambassador Andres Montalvo, Deputy Permanent Representative of Ecuador.
Thank you very much, and I congratulate the Permanent Mission of Argentina and the offices of SRSG's Patent and Gamba for inviting us to reflect on the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict. After having examined the conceptual note and listening carefully to this morning's briefings and testimonies, the conclusion is inevitable. No efforts should be spared to completely eradicate the use of sexual violence as a tactic of war. No es hora de callar. Historically, sexual violence has been a constant and continues to be used as a weapon around the world. Afghanistan, Central African Republic, DRC, Ethiopia, Yemen, Syria, Mali, Myanmar, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan, Ukraine, Haiti. I could continue with the enumeration. Several reports from the SG and other reports from the UN Action Network that analyze the issue, resolutions of the G8 and the Security Council, international humanitarian law, studies from the academia and civil society, among others, informed analysis of sexual violence in conflict situations. So I just would like to highlight the importance of three central elements of SRSV. First, identification of dynamics that lead to unwanted pregnancies, sexual slavery, forced marriages, and/or human trafficking, and the design of specific care protocols. Second, implementation of accountability processes which allow victims to access reporting mechanisms and ensure that those responsible are investigated and prosecuted from a victim and survivors-centered approach. Third, establishment of prevention mechanisms based on the training, inclusion, and participation of surviving victims in mediation, peace building, and peacekeeping processes. Madam President, as an elected member of the Security Council, Ecuador is committed to the Women, Peace, and Security agenda and adherent to the so-called shared commitments. Finally, in that context, my delegation's calls to further continue exploring in the effort of bridging the gender-digital divide to prevent a threat address and respond to conflict-related sexual violence the elements of the youth, peace, and security agenda that could inform the analysis. Who better than the youth to contribute to the myriad of challenges posed by the digital dilemma included in this matter, as has been portrayed this morning? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. Unfortunately, the ambassador from the United Kingdom had to leave, so I give the floor to a representative of the UK. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Excellencies, colleagues. Thank you, Madam Ambassador, and thank you, SRSG Patton, SRSG Gamba, and dear panelists, for your deeply motivating statements marking this International Day. This is an endeavor that the UK has been committed to since Lord Hague and Angelina Jolie launched our Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict initiative in 2012. Over a decade later, the UK remains deeply committed in our determination to tackle CRSV. We are united with many others in the room in the fight to prevent CRSV, ensure accountability for these crimes, and support survivors to rebuild their lives. Survivors continue to be at the heart of our efforts, informing our policymaking and steering our commitments. From the DRC to Ukraine, Colombia to Myanmar and Sudan, we see the destruction CRSV has wrought upon survivors and their families and their communities. Despite a strong international legal framework for CRSV, impunity for these crimes goes unchecked. As we've heard today, CRSV takes many forms and has devastating impacts. Due to chronic underreporting, we only see the tip of this iceberg. Our resolve to eliminate CRSV involves broadening our understanding of these different forms. For example, SRSG Patton highlighted CRSV committed by non-state armed actors and how sexual violence is used as a form of reprisal to silence women. As we heard from SRSG Gamba, we must consider the specific needs of children survivors of CRSV and address the issues faced by children born of rape and conflict. The UK will continue to take action as we set out in our International PSVI conference last November. A total of 53 countries signed a political declaration to eliminate CRSV, and our Foreign Secretary launched $16 million of new funding to deliver on these goals identified at the conference by survivors, experts, and country representatives. In March this year, the UK also launched the International Alliance on Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict to bring together key states, multilateral partners, survivors, and civil society. We are fortunate to have the governments of Colombia and Ukraine as our vice chairs, offering critical insights from their national experiences to benefit others. The Alliance will play an important role in amplifying survivors' voices, sharing expertise, and developing new approaches to eliminate CRSV. To promote accountability, we are committed to using all the tools at our disposal, including sanctioning perpetrators. Today, we have sanctioned 4 individuals from Syria and the DRC for committing crimes of sexual violence and conflict. This takes us to 13 sanctioned perpetrators since the PSVI conference, including for the rape of civilians in Syria, South Sudan, Myanmar, and the Central African Republic. The UK is also working in partnership with the International Criminal Court, exploring how new technologies like virtual reality can be harnessed to help survivors seek justice. Next month, during the UK's presidency of the Security Council, we hope you will join us for the debate on sexual violence and conflict. We encourage states, civil society, and UN and international bodies to use this opportunity to look at how we can close the gaps and promote implementation of the strong legal and normative framework on CRSV. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to the United States Deputy Political Coordinator, Her Excellency Trina Saha.
Madam Ambassador, SRSG Patton, distinguished panelists, we sincerely appreciate your remarks on this important topic. Thank you for shining a spotlight on the need to bridge the gender digital divide as we commemorate the 9th official observance of the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence and Conflict. The United States is firmly committed to preventing and responding to conflict-related sexual violence and all other forms of gender-based violence, including technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Gender-based online harassment and abuse attacks and silences women and girls, particularly those already marginalized due to their disability status, sexual orientation, gender identity, race, ethnicity, or religion. An estimated 85% of women and girls globally have experienced some form of online harassment and abuse. Authoritarian powers are increasingly finding ways to repress civil society, spread disinformation, and undermine confidence in democratic institutions. Women in politics, civil society activists, peacebuilders, and, as Ms. Lima highlighted, journalists are often disproportionately targeted and impacted by threats and attacks. We need a sense of urgency and determination to call out misuse and abuse of technology, and determination on the part of NGOs and civil society to hold governments and the private sector to account. We need to find better ways to use information and communications technology to support early warning and prevention efforts and help women in imminent danger so that they can receive emergency help. As SRSG Patton referenced, we need to utilize technology in a survivor-centered and trauma-informed way to document cases of conflict-related sexual violence so that perpetrators cannot act with impunity. Thank you to Physicians for Human Rights for your incredible work to do just that through your Medicap mobile application and much more. I want to underscore that the best long-term protection from conflict-related sexual violence is building equal and just societies, including those where human rights of all women and girls are respected, so that they have equal protection under the law and that they have timely access to justice, technology, opportunity, and the educational opportunities that they deserve. We look forward to working together to prevent and respond to conflict-related sexual violence, strengthen accountability for perpetrators, and protect and advance the rights of women and girls, and elevate their role in promoting peace and security. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the United States also for your support. We give the floor to Councillor Natalia Mudarenko of Ukraine, Permanent Mission of Ukraine. The floor is yours.
Chair, firstly, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers for convening this event, which aims to show solidarity with the survivors of conflict-related sexual violence and to unite efforts in ensuring accountability for the perpetrators and their commanders. The Russian Federation, in its aggression against my country, Ukraine, persists in employing sexual violence as a weapon of war. To date, prosecutors and investigators have documented over 208 cases of such crimes, including 13 cases committed against children. It is important to note that these numbers only represent the cases in which survivors were willing to testify. The actual figures are undoubtedly much higher. Ukraine remains steadfast in its commitment to replacing impunity with justice and transforming indifference into action. The experiences, needs, and demands of survivors lie at the core of all our endeavors. We commend the efforts of the SRSG Spartans and her team, who have provided substantial assistance to the government of Ukraine in achieving these goals. As a part of this endeavor, we signed a framework of cooperation with the UN last year to respond to and prevent conflict-related sexual violence. We also adopted a detailed implementation plan that involves state institutions, civil society, and international organizations as the key stakeholders, including UNFPA, UN Women, and all others. Another crucial step is to garner political commitments and actively participate in the international legal battle for justice. Ukraine has joined the International Alliance on Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict initiative, which was launched by the United Kingdom. The collaboration between states, multilateral partners, civil society, and survivors is an indispensable prerequisite for breaking the cycle of impunity. Our collective response must be resolute, unwavering, and decisive. Those responsible for inflicting widespread suffering upon the vulnerable cannot be whitewashed or overlooked. However, above all, the international community must consolidate its efforts to exert pressure on Russia and bring an end to this brutal and unjustifiable war, I think.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Ms. Yunei Kim, of the Permanent Mission of Australia.
Thank you. Chair, thank you and the organisers for this important event. As reported by the UN Secretary-General, sexual violence is being used deliberately and systematically in active conflicts today. Sexual violence in conflict can constitute a war crime that is as damaging as the use of chemical or nuclear weapons. Violence online or offline target at women, peacebuilders, human rights defenders, community activists, protesters, students and educators, and journalists are abhorrent. It is an abuse of human rights and prevents peace and long-term stability and security. Australia's commitment to eliminating sexual violence in conflict is long-standing and is being actioned under our National Plan on Women, Peace and Security 2021 to 2031. As part of this plan, Australia trains and deploys gender advisors on military, police, humanitarian, relief and recovery, and crisis operations and missions. We are committed to holding perpetrators to account, including targeted human rights sanctions against persons and entities. We are committed to addressing technology-facilitated gender-based violence and promoting safety by design principles that puts user safety and rights at the centre and development of online products and services. We are also committed to delivering justice and ensuring that persons subjected to sexual violence in conflict have access to comprehensive support and services. On the 9th commemoration of the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual and Violence in Conflicts, Australia joins others in this room and many more and reconfirms its commitment and call for the end of sexual violence in conflict and all forms of violence. We commit to #EndRapeInWar. Thank you.
Thank you. I turn to Ms. Katharina Gode from Germany, Permanent Mission of Germany. Thank you.
I wish to thank the Office of the SRSG on Sexual Violence and Conflict, the Office of the SRSG for Children in Armed Conflict, and the Permanent Mission of Argentina to the United Nations for co-hosting. It is incredibly important to keep the focus on fighting conflict-related sexual violence. Especially the topic of this event on bridging the gender-digital divide is particularly timely. Sexual violence in the context of conflict continues to be used as a tactic of war, torture and terrorism amid intensifying political and security crisis. We are deeply concerned about recent developments in many regions of the world, such as Sudan and Ukraine. To improve the situation, we must take immediate action. This includes the recognition of information and communications technology, both as a mean of digital threats and incitement to gender-based violence, and as an effective tool for improving gender equality and empowering women and girls in all their diversity. In this regard, the documentation of the experiences of survivors of sexual violence through ICT is particularly important as a step towards more accountability. On this International Day, we reiterate our absolute condemnation of conflict-related sexual violence. We stand by all victims and survivors and remain fully committed to ensure accountability and justice. Over the past decade, the understanding of the causes and consequences of CRSV and its impact on international peace has evolved. There is now greater awareness of the connection to other crimes such as terrorism, human trafficking, and transnational organized crime. To counter all of this, it is necessary to address its root causes. These causes include structural gender inequalities, discrimination, and social norms that enable sexual violence even in peacetime. When protection systems and structures are further weakened or destroyed during a conflict, the affected population, amid all genders, but disproportionately women and girls, are even more exposed to sexual violence. To address these root causes, Germany strongly supports the mandate of SRSG Pattern and the work of the United Nations team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict. This year, we again support their work with a project budget of 1 million in total, of which 500,000 will go to Ukraine. This stronger accountability will be achieved by strengthening political will to promote accountability for CRSV at the national, regional, and international level, enhancing the technical and operational capacity of national rule of law institutions and actors to promote accountability for CRSV, and improving collaboration, coordination, coherence, and knowledge sharing among the various actors working to promote accountability. However, there is still much to be done, and to be effective, our actions must be accompanied by a genuine paradigm shift in all our societies. Achieving gender equality and ensuring the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women and girls in all areas of life is more urgent than ever. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Ms. Bola Asaju, the Permanent Mission of Nigeria. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would like to express my appreciation to the Office of the Representative of Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Office of Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict, and the Argentine Palm Mission. Nigeria continues to condemn sexual violence in all its forms, and particularly in the commemoration of today's event, which is to express its continued support towards ongoing global efforts to eliminate gender violence in conflict. Nigeria has always, through concerted efforts, taken steps to ensure accountability for crimes of sexual violence. It has also collaborated with the United Nations and other international partners to ensure the continued protection of Nigerians and foreigners within its borders against such abhorrent acts. Besides prioritizing gender-based education and economic empowerment programs to promote women's resiliency and adaptability in the face of conflict, Nigeria continues to strengthen its digital economy agenda, which targets 95% digital literacy in the country by 2030. This aims to lift over 100 million more Nigerians out of poverty in the next 8 years. It is projected that the digital economy will play a major role in achieving this laudable objective. Despite concerted efforts geared towards the eradication of all forms of conflict-based sexual violence, the world continues to grapple with increasing rates of conflict and consequently a surge in the prevalence of sexual violence in this conflict. This calls for global action to address violence against women and girls during conflict. Educating every woman and girl, especially in vulnerable situations, on the use of digital information and communication technologies is a major contributor to this effort. It is also imperative that more women, especially in developing countries, should have equitable access to affordable internet, information and communication technologies, and training on effective use of digital technologies. Equitable opportunities for education in science, technology, engineering, and math should be made available to more girls in post-elementary school levels. Multi-sectoral approach to stop culturally entrenched practices of female discrimination at country levels should be employed, and multilateral cooperation should be enhanced so as to strengthen state capabilities to bridge the widening gender digital gap, while also dealing with the threat posed by violent conflict, criminality, and terrorism. We are convinced that United Nations remain the central platform for raising awareness for the plight of women and girls in conflict, and their need to enjoy the benefits of digital development as an instrument to prevent, address, and respond to conflict-related gender violence. We also acknowledge the progress made so far by the various United Nations mechanisms in addressing conflict-related sexual violence, especially the untiring effort of the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict. Nigeria continues to support and work with the United Nations and international partners in that important endeavor. I thank you.
Thank you very much. With this, we turn to our final speaker, a critically important voice, voice of civil society, Ms. Mavic Cabrera Balleza, who is the founder and chief executive officer of the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders. The floor is yours.
I add my thanks to the offices of the SRSGs on sexual violence in conflict and for children in armed conflict, the Permanent Mission of Argentina, for organizing this essential conversation, and to our panelists for their compelling remarks. So I'll add a few more context on the response or lack thereof to the gender technology-facilitated sexual violence, and present some recommendations from the perspective of civil society. Despite the documented cybersecurity insecurity compounded by women's lack of access and limited knowledge to navigate cyberspace, the lack of adequate response from telecommunication companies as well as member states is deeply concerning. Most national cybersecurity policies that could have been instruments in addressing technology-facilitated gender-based violence do not address these issues. From our research at the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, supported by Switzerland, we learned that there are 120 national cybersecurity strategies, far more than the 107 national action plans on women, peace, and security. Most national cybersecurity strategies do not have a gender perspective and are entirely detached from national action plans on women, peace, and security. Many national cybersecurity strategies do not involve civil society in their development and implementation. A more complex problem in cybersecurity interventions is when the state misuses cybersecurity policies for political purposes and become a cyber threat actor. For example, by silencing political opponents through censoring online content, spreading online propaganda, using surveillance technologies against civil society, including women peacebuilders and other dissenters, or using the fight against disinformation as a pretext for prosecution. Member states, the UN, civil society, research and educational institutions, and the digital technology sector must turn the double-edged character of digital technologies into an opportunity to build consensus on how the technologies can be used for the good of people and the world, and specifically address sexual violence online, while also addressing the risks they present. Here are some recommendations. Member states must work with civil society to ensure that digital technologies are accessible to all, culturally sensitive, and that the internet is a safe and empowering space for women and girls. Number two, member states must fully and equally involve civil society in developing and implementing national cybersecurity strategies. Such strategies must take a whole-of-nation approach and integrate the women, peace, and security perspective. Cybersecurity does not have to come at the expense of women's rights and democracy. Number three, diverse women must be encouraged and supported to enter the digital technology profession and lead research and development to prevent the misuse of digital platforms. Number four, telecommunication companies must not be allowed to amass profit while their platforms continue to be the site of online sexual and gender-based violence. They must be held accountable for monitoring online content and not allow them to solely decide what is acceptable online. What is acceptable should be in line with international standards for peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development, and feminist principles. Now, more than ever, we need to understand the connections between gender and cybersecurity and recognize the need to protect women's rights, human rights, and human security in cyberspace. Only then can we develop crucial policies to address cyber threats and risks at the human level and ensure the safety, inclusion, and continuation of women peacebuilders' vital work. Political commitment matched with financial commitment from member states, the United Nations, the European Union, other multilateral institutions, the donor community, and other stakeholders is necessary to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A fitting end to this event. Thank you all for your presence here today and for your commitment to this cause. I'd like to also take the opportunity to invite all of you to attend the opening ceremony of tomorrow, actually, of the interactive photo exhibition, which is a conflict-related sexual violence survivor's journey. It's launched by UN Action. It's going to be from 6 to 8 p.m., at the UN General Assembly South Lobby. The exhibition actually continues until the 28th of August, and we hope to see you there. With this, we bring this 9th commemoration event to a close. Thank you very much.